All right, let's start with news from the second presidential summit on gender-based violence and femicide, which is underway in Midrand. Children who were scheduled to speak at the summit were removed from the program at the last minute. This did not go down well. These young people say, as victims of violence, they should be allowed to be part of the conversation seeking solutions. Yesterday, President Ramaphosa addressed the summit, saying citizens must hold government accountable. Our reporter Silindelo Masikane joins us now. So, Slee, let's focus then on the role of children. When were they removed from the program and why?
Yeah, I think it was due to a timing issue. We've been running over in terms of the program today, and the Children's Parliament was scheduled to speak much earlier on. We heard from a representative from the Teddy Bear Clinic as well as the members of the Children's Parliament saying that they don't understand why they've been removed from the program, and I think their complaints were heard. And just a few minutes ago, about 10 minutes ago, Sally, the representatives from the Children's Parliament actually were able to address the summit, putting their concerns on the table, saying that they represent 22 million children, and the fact that this summit takes place at a time where children are busy with exams is unfair, saying that more needs to be done to include them in the pillars in the National Strategic Plan to end the scourge of gender-based violence, saying that every single day we're hearing horrific stories about how children are being murdered and raped in various communities. Let's take a listen.
Our expectations are that for the next summit, we feel that as children we need to be included from the first processes of the sitting of the summit, so that we can also throw in our views and opinions, because yes, we agree that we are children, but we should not derail from the fact that we are the country and we cease to exist if we will always be closed down and pushed away and not being included in these conversations, because we are the victims each and every day. There's a case of a child that's been kidnapped, there's a case of a child that's been raped, there's a case of a child that's been brutally killed, and there's a case of a child that is being abused in their home. So we refuse to be silenced. We want to be part of the conversation so that we can also try to push the agenda of children not allowing to be silenced, because we are silenced in our own homes, where the femicide, the gender-based violence is taken in our homes, so that we as the children, we want to voice out and raise awarenesses to say, do not be quiet, do not be silenced, because it's our rights that are being violated.
Yeah, I mean, running out of time at the conference seems like a pretty poor excuse for suddenly excluding children. Has there been any official response to these concerns raised by the kids?
Unfortunately not, because we were really at the end stage of this program, where the resolutions at this point are being discussed, and you know, the implementations or the expectations of implementations and timelines is what is being presented in terms of what was discussed in the different plenaries. So unfortunately, I think if there is another summit, perhaps then we will have more inclusion of children in terms of the program itself.
You also had a very interesting conversation about women with albinism, and it seems to be that these women can sometimes be doubly targeted. Just explain this to us.
It's one of those communities, and one of the organizations here representing those living with albinism came out to really voice their concerns around the fact that their issues are not being addressed, that they continue to be disadvantaged, and in fact that you know, when it comes to legislation, they are demanding that albinism actually be declared a disability, saying that from birth there are many issues that people living with this condition face, and that they are discriminated against when it comes to employment, and that they have a lot of health issues that come with the condition. Not only that, Sally, we know that they are also a target of muti killings, also lambasting law enforcement for not actually taking their cases seriously. But in particular, the organization that we spoke to was saying that women living with albinism are also very vulnerable and at risk of gender-based violence. Let's take a listen.
Women with albinism, they have a lot of disadvantages. As I have spoken to you about being employable. And again, you find that because one is not employed, now she end up being in an incorrect relationship. It's a disadvantage. And then GBV is going to hit that person more than a normal person, you see. So hence we say there are a lot of disadvantages for our people, a lot. And remember, some, due to their eyesight, are not even able to can get driver's licenses and all that. And driver's license is a requirement these days. So are we included in that note? No. So it's a disadvantage. Sometimes you've got matric, but because the position wants the driver's license, then you are not qualifying because of that. So those are the things that needs to be changed.
So those are sort of specialised issues, crucial as well. But something that I found quite fascinating is that Treasury represented today at the conference saying, actually, lack of funds is not one of the problems we're facing. The real issue is that the money is not spent properly. People don't know how to plan the spending of that money. And this is coming from the money people. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, it was quite shocking, I think, for those in attendance here at the summit that the acting DG for the National Treasury Department came here not really prepared, Sally, in terms of accounting, which is one of the themes of this summit, to actually tell us, give us a slideshow, perhaps, in terms of what you know, in terms of the various departments, the money that you give them, how are they utilizing it. In particular, social development, we know that they are tasked with funding various programs, but the acting national DG simply saying that, look, I understand that we are supposed to do more, and the issue is that in fact we need to improve the reporting and gathering of information around the funding of gender-based violence. And like you said, the money is there. It's just a matter of the department not being able to tell us exactly how it's being spent. Let's take a listen.
We have to do more, and clearly we're not winning if you look at the numbers, and I think the President outlined that yesterday quite well, the scourge that we're dealing with. And I think the question you ask is a very important question, because we have a number of programs, and the issue is, are they being funded adequately? And I'm going to answer that. I have a figure, 13 billion. The issue is, what is the capability of the state? I think that even before state capture, it's been a problem, and certainly with state capture, it became a bigger problem. Can departments actually do what they say they're going to do? If a program has been budgeted for, are they able to do that? I think that's a challenge we face across government, not just for programs around gender-based violence and femicide. It's a huge problem. It impacts on delivery of services, how we serve communities, the role that government plays, I think is critical. All of us as public servants must be accountable.
So just on a point of clarity, Slee, because what you seem to be saying is that the National Treasury Acting DG arrived at the summit not properly prepared to answer questions on how money is allocated across government. So that's one real concern. But what he seems to be saying is that the money is allocated, but it's not properly used when it is allocated. Have I got that right?
Yeah, you've got it right, Sally. That is exactly what he was saying. I mean, he put a figure of around 13 billion rand that was set aside by the department to fund programs to fight the scourge of gender-based violence. But coming back here to the summit, he can't tell us how that 13 billion was actually used, which I think is quite problematic, because it means that there are gaping holes in terms of how the system is operating in terms of allocation conversation, because I think if any department should know how this money is being spent, every single cent, it should be National Treasury, which is also one of the issues that has come out in this summit, is that departments are simply not reporting and giving those monthly feedbacks, which has been the expectation since the initial summit back in 2018. So, I think the main theme coming out today was that issue of funding the fight of gender-based violence, but also timelines and timeframes in terms of the implementation of the pillars in the National Strategic Plan.
All right, thank you very much, Silindelo Masikane, who is at that Midrand Summit. Let's now move to Pietermaritzburg. We're joined by our reporter, Lethiwe Mdluli. And Lethiwe, you've taken a rather different focus around gender-based violence, spending time with people who run those centres, the shelters, the places of safety where women and children can go. They are the people on the ground, I imagine, who can tell you what gets in the way of them doing their best work. What have you learned today?
Well, Sally, right now I'm actually standing with an organization that deals with survivors and victims of GBV and femicide. And I want to bring them into this conversation and ask them these very important questions around the summits and also around what is currently happening in our country. I'm going to start with Lulama. We basically have had a summit every year for 4 years here in South Africa. And of course, as GBV people or GBV survivors have said in that summit, not enough is done when it comes to fighting the scourge. As organizations, what do you think needs to be done to end the scourge? And do you think that government is doing enough to assist?
No, definitely. They definitely aren't doing enough. You see this in the surge of the amount of reported cases of gender-based violence and how many of those cases are actually being dealt with and those victims are actually getting justice. There isn't enough being done. There should be more. In fact, there needs to be an integration between the work that government is doing and then us as organizations. That can be through funding, that can be through many avenues, both in reportive and responsive measures and prevention measures. So I do believe and I do side with those who are saying that there isn't enough. The work that government is trying to implement is not reaching us, and it's not reaching those on the ground, those who are actually dealing with responding to victims of gender-based violence and femicide.
What do you think government needs to do instead of holding the summits? What is it that you guys need right now as organizations?
Listen, the summits for me are just a wasteful expenditure, big elaborate summits that form parts of lip service. And actually, instead of actually being with us on the ground, you've got Department of Social Development. What is the work that they're doing on the ground? The Department of Justice. What is the work that they're doing on the ground? These are people that are actually should be part of the solution forming for gender-based violence, but instead we are left by ourselves to do the work on the ground, while government, we don't really feel an impact from their side. So I understand that we should be holding them accountable, as is the theme of the summit this year. But what are we holding accountable if you've got an increase in a surge of 52% in terms of gender-based violence and femicide?
I also have Usis Nomvuselelo here. Sisi, we just mentioned that there's an increase in the number of GBV cases in the country. And of course, government has been having the summits. It looks like what they're doing is not working. Right now, you're actually going to be protesting tomorrow outside a magistrate court following a murder of a young woman. Take us through what you're going to be doing tomorrow.
Tomorrow, as Usisa says, Sheila, we will be outside in Richmond courts, outside the magistrate courts, protesting against the killing of the young woman who was beaten to death by the boyfriend and brutally killed and burnt in August. So we will be protesting outside in partnership with DSD. And I do second what Lulama has mentioned, that the seminars that are being held currently are just big wasteful expenditure. Instead, the money that is spent on these summits and seminars could be distributed to the organizations that are on the ground implementing these programs. And that way we'll be able to find a tangible impact, because currently, as you have mentioned, there's above 50% of these cases, and it's continuing to go up.
Yeah. So basically, you don't have enough funds to help your victims or survivors?
No, we don't. We are currently just funded by DSD and we're only implementing the DSD programs. But as Mzansi Youth in Business, we have programs that address GBV individually, such as the Segwanele program that we have. But if we had more funding, we would be able to reach these people not only through the structured programs that we have, but we also wanted to implement outreach programs to go out and assist the white door homes that house the GBV victims, such as the campaign that we intend to implement as of the beginning of 16 Days of Activism, which is The Abuser is Amongst Us, which we'll be targeting the men, especially the men in influential society, to ensure that they take part and lead the fight against GBV, as we have been walking as women, but there is no change. So we feel that if the men identify the abusers amongst them and hold them accountable, we will be able to decrease the scourge of GBV.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So that is Mzansi Youth in Business here in KZN. Basically, what they do is they work with victims and also survivors of GBV. What they're saying is that they would rather have those funds where the government is busy holding summits directed to them, because they need money to fight the scourge of GBV in the country.
Yeah, such a telling message coming from the people who really are making a difference on the ground. Thank you so much, Lethiwe Mdluli in Pietermaritzburg, and that one woman saying, we are left by ourselves. They do not feel supported by government. Clearly there are some funds coming to some of the projects from the Department of Social Development, for example, but that's not enough. And they're saying, why hold a summit? Just give us the money you're going to spend on a summit. We can put it to good use.